Hello, friends! By the moth of Grace Hopper and the brilliant glow of Lamore Freed's pink hair, I'm Professor John Gallagher, and this is a semester in Swift 1/3 of the course midterm challenge. And for our online friends, this is suggested that you take this after completing the first 3 app chapters in the course. In this challenge, our students will build an app celebrating standout women in computing. It's time for you to prove your big learning. #STEMinism. So several of the women who have taken my Swift UI course have gone on to raise capital and build their businesses, Kelsey and Linda among them. We need more female founders, and I thought celebrating some of the OG women in computing would be inspiring for everyone. So in my course, we have 2 midterms and a final exam. The midterms usually involve building multiple apps and sometimes Xcode playgrounds as well. This is taken from a midterm after the first third of the course. In this test, students had to build 2 apps, so this is half of the test. And in my in-person course, students work on their own laptops for 2.5 hours. They cannot open prior code examples or use AI or the internet, but they can use a single page of double-sided notes. Why this approach? Well, my students take the course to be app developers, and you simply can't survive a technical interview if you need to constantly look it up. You won't be taken seriously, you won't get the job. Now, as a professor, I will tell you frankly that testing and assessment are vastly imperfect, but I think the approach that we use in my class, combined with other metrics in an individual final project, is a decent balance that reflects real-world expectations. With that said, let's build. So here's the app. Students will demonstrate some basic Swift UI layout concepts in the design. We've got our icon and our launch screen. You can see we have buttons with labeled icons and additional formatting. The backgrounds bleed into the safe area. There's an image with rounded corners and a shadow, and an additional text view within a scroll view. Now as you tap the chevron buttons, you'll move forward or backward in the list. Once you get to the last entry, you'll loop around to the first entry, and if you're at the first entry and hit the left chevron, you'll go to the last entry. Now, students were also asked to show how to implement this round trip using the ternary operator in one of these buttons and the modulo operator in another button to demonstrate their logical thinking and knowledge of Swift statements. Pressing the shuffle button will return a random profile. The random profile shouldn't repeat the same profile, so students should use repeat while or some other type of conditional logic. And as a bit of a surprise and delight, when the random entry is shown, females are strong and unbreakable. A theme song plays. It's a fast, fun build that demonstrates a lot of topics covered in the early part of our course. So let's check out the test question by question, and after each question, I'll show you a solution. So at the start of this app, I mentioned the URL where you can download the assets that we'll use in this build. Here's a look at what the app will look like when it's done. In those files, I mentioned to use the Women in Tech icon.png for the project's icon, and to use the files named launch screen as the app's launch screen, and also to drag over any other files in the MP3 sound because we're going to be using those in our code. Why don't we head to this URL now? We'll find the Computing Women folder. I don't need the text for Women in Computing question, so I option clicked on top of that, but it doesn't matter if you downloaded it. Then right-click and select Download. It's probably saving this to your Downloads folder, but I have mine saved to the desktop. Then let's launch Xcode and create a new project. Call this Women in Computing. Be sure to create a Git repository for this. This is a great one to add to your portfolio. Now to add these assets, I'm going to head over to the Assets catalog, and I'm going to click on App Icon. In the text of the test, I mentioned to use the Women in Tech icon as your app icon, so I'm going to drag that over and plop it into the first 1024 by 1024 square. Then I'll highlight everything except for that app icon and drag it over into the sidebar for assets. There are all the files. This file called launch screen has 3 different sizes to use for the launch screen, so let's create that. The trick I teach my students is if you click on this and press return, you're on rename mode, but you can also Command C to copy the name so you don't have to type it in again. I'll click first on the Women in Computing project icon at the top. Make sure you click on the Info tab. Then head down to launch screen and click on the expansion triangle so it points below this, and the indented item down below has a little circle with a plus sign inside. Click that, then select image name. Head over to the value cell. You can double click inside there and add launch screen, which is the name of the image. Now we can double check this in the simulator, so I'll pull down an iPhone to simulate in the scheme. Click on the play button. I can see our launch screen. There's nothing else inside, but if I click on the home button in the simulator, I can see our icon is there as well. Mission accomplished. Then let's head back to Xcode. We'll head to our content view file and adjust our screen, and let's look at the next question. So I mentioned to create an area at the top of your app that looks like the image below, and note that there are buttons on the left and right. The buttons use system icons for their names, chevron left circle and chevron.right.circle respectively. The button images are bold, large font, and are white. The buttons are on a cyan colored background with 50% opacity. Be sure to add padding so that the layout resembles the image below. You can see that the buttons neither touch the sides of the device nor the very bottom of the colored background. And then in the next question, you're going to be doing the same except for the bottom. bottom. So you want to create an area on the bottom of your app that looks like the image below. Note that there's one button on the right containing the system symbol for shuffle. The button image is bold, large font, and white, just like above, and also the background is once again cyan with 50% opacity. Be sure to add padding so that the layout resembles the image that you see here. It should neither touch the sides of the device nor the very top of the colored background. So let's do that. So to make this happen, I'm going to delete what's in the VStack, and I need an HStack inside of this so that I can have my buttons aligned horizontally. Now, since I want a system image of my button, I'm going to select the button option with the action and label. Press return to get the closure format. For the action, for now, I'm just going to put in a to-do saying this is the button action, and in the label, I'm going to say image and select the option with system name, and I'm going to give that the name chevron.left.circle, just as the exam stated. Then copy this button definition, paste it down below, and change chevron left to chevron.right.circle. And in between these two buttons, I'm going to add a spacer, and I can see that pushes the buttons to the sides. Now, I also mentioned that the text inside should be bold and in large title font, so I'll add those modifiers after the HStack so that they apply to both buttons. I'm going to put a spacer down below so that the buttons are pushed to the top. Then I'll add my background with dot background. I'm going to pass a color in between parens, dot cyan. And remember, I said that this should have an opacity of 0.5, so I'll say opacity and pass in 0.5. That looks nice. It's nicely muted, but it's not bleeding into the top and side areas like I'd requested. But as shown in our in-class examples and in our video lessons, we know the culprit. It's the fact that we have a padding on our VStack. So I'm going to delete that. Our background now bleeds into the safe area at the top, which is what we want. Let's add a padding after the font before the background so we get a little bit more padding in there as requested. We've got the background color after the padding, so this is looking good. And after the dot font modifier, I'm going to say dot foreground style, changing the color to dot white. The buttons are white. This is looking great. Then, since I want to do pretty much the same thing down below, I'm going to highlight this HStack with all of its modifiers and copy it and paste it below the spacer at the end of the VStack. This looks good, but I don't want a button on the left-hand side, so I'm going to delete that button. And on the right side, I'm going to change my system name for the button image to the string shuffle. Looking good. On to the next question. Now this says in the folder at this particular URL, you'll notice a Google Doc named Text for Women Computing Question. If you double click that, you can open the file in Google Docs and you'll see the text in there and do as follows. Create an array names, which contains the names of the women under names. Create an array bios, which contains the bios of the women under bios. And keep track of the current women displayed using a variable named current index and initially show the first element in the array. And because you know arrays are zero indexed, this should be the value 0. So head back to the browser and find the text for the women in computing question. Let's open that up. You can see all the text is in here as described, so I'm going to grab everything that's under the name section and copy that, then head back over to Xcode. And up top between the struct content view and the var body, I'm going to create a value to hold all those values. Some of you might have used a state variable for this. That'd be fine. It doesn't break your code, but since we're not going to modify any of the names or bios, we can put them in constants. So I'm going to say private let, call this lowercase names, set it equal to, and in between square brackets, I'll paste in what I copied, adjust the bracket, and we've got our names array. Then below this, I'll say private let bios equal, and in between square brackets, head back over to our browser. I'll copy everything under bios. This is a lot of text. For organizational purposes, it might be better to add this to an extension at the bottom of your code so that you don't have a lot of stuff up top, but this is fine. I didn't ask you to do that. I'll paste it in, make sure we got a square bracket at the end, and we've got our two arrays. And I also mentioned to keep track of the current woman that's shown in a variable named current index, so this is gonna change, so this should be a state variable at state private var current index lower camel case equals 0. And then for the next question, the name of the first woman in names should show centered in between the top buttons at the top of the app. Do what's necessary to ensure that the name's displayed without being cut off and they're on a single line of text in our text view. The image of that first woman should also show centered vertically in the app, taking up as much space as available without being distorted. There should be standard padding around the image, and the image should have curved corners with a radius of 10 and a shadow of radius 20. And below the image should be a text view containing the bio, appropriate for the person whose image is being shown. There should be padding around the view, and one additional requirement, you'll notice that the text of the view is cut off, but you can fix this by embedding the text view in a scroll view with curly braces. Although we haven't covered this in the lesson, simply add the keyword scroll view with curlies and put the text view inside this. Also put any modifiers for the text view inside the curlies. Let's build this. Now, when we cover navigating between different views, you're going to see that you're going to be able to create the kind of thing that we created above using a technique for creating something called a toolbar. But we're not there yet, so we're using this technique. To add a text between our two buttons, I'm going to add a spacer and then a text view. Text view will have the names array, and in between brackets, I'll put in current index. Now to ensure everything fits on one line, I'll say dot minimum scale factor, and I'll pass in a 0.5. And to limit everything to a line, we'll say dot line limit, passing in a 1. This should do the trick. And now in between the H stack and the spacer, I'm going to add another spacer and then my image. Since I'm using images that are inside of the asset catalog, I'm going to select the option with the name and passing in a string. And if you looked, you saw that the image names were the same as the name. So we can use the names array to show our image. So we'll simply say names, passing in between square bracket, current index. Ada Lovelace shows up. Let's make her big. So we'll say dot resizable and dot scale to fit. We'll also add some dot padding, and above this we'll say dot clip shape, passing in a rounded rectangle with a corner radius, passing in the value of 10 as asked. Then to create a shadow, we'll pass in our dot shadow with a radius of 20. Looking good, if a little bigger than we showed, but we haven't yet added our bio, so let's do that below. We'll add another text view, passing in the bio array, and in between brackets we'll also pass in current index. And remember, I said to embed this in a scroll view, so we add scroll view above this with curlies. I'll move that text view inside. And remember, you don't want the padding on the outside. I said put any modifier for the text view inside the scroll view. So that's where the padding should be. Our bio scrolls looking good. Now up next, when pressing the right button, we should advance to the next woman profiled, and once the last woman in the list is shown, then the profile should loop back to the very first woman in the list. The appropriate name, image, and bio should be shown each time the button is pressed, and for full credit, the implementation on this should be a one-liner using the ternary operator. And if you can't use the ternary operator, then use whatever other logic that you think works. Now, for the next question, we're going to do something similar. Pressing the left button should move to the prior woman profiled. Once the first woman in the list of names is shown, we should loop back to the last woman in the list of arrays. Again, the appropriate name, image, and bio should be shown, and for full credit here, you're going to implement on one line using the remainder or modulo operator, the percentage operator. And if you can't use that for partial credit, you can use whatever technique you want, probably an if-then statement. So let's work on the right button first, so I'm going to delete the comment up here. And now if you didn't know how to do this with the ternary operator, you could implement it this way. Current index plus equals 1. Remember, that's the same as current index equals current index plus 1. And then we'll put an if statement down below. If current index greater than or equal to names.count, and in between the curlies, we can say current index equals 0. That means if we've ever pressed the right button and we've got to the last element in the array, we'll loop back to the first element, which is element 0. We can try this out. Tamarian Rogers is the last woman in our names array. Press once more, and we head to Ada Lovelace. Perfect, but for full credit, I asked you to use the ternary operator for this. And for comparison, I'm going to comment out everything that's inside of our current action, and then I'll say current index equals, and remember how the ternary operator works. First, we have a true-false statement. Now, since we haven't incremented the current index, in here we're going to check to see if the current index is greater than or equal to, and this is going to be names.count minus 1. Then we'll say question mark. If this is true, we'll pass back 0, so that'll set current index equal to 0, colon, but if this is false, we'll pass back current index plus 1. And we can try this out. This looks great, and if we head all the way over to Tamarian Rogers and click the right button one more time, we head to Ada Lovelace, mission accomplished. We have these 4 lines now on a single line of code using the ternary operator. I'm going to delete the old if-else statement in here. You could leave yours in there if you want. Now for the next technique, we should use the remainder operator, sometimes referred to as modulo in other programming languages. Now we learned about this in one of our video lessons, and my students also used the modulo operator to loop around values when we were working with our Lunar New Year app in class. We simply say current index equals, and we'll say current index minus 1. But, and if there were anything that were challenging in here, we want to make sure that we don't get a negative value. Now that would happen if we took this value here and we got the remainder, so percentage symbol names.count. Remember, the remainder operator gives us negatives. We don't want negatives in here, so what we'll also do is we'll add names.count. That'll ensure that we always get a positive result. So if you do the math in your head, by taking current index, subtracting 1, we move in the left-handed direction, but adding names.count will ensure we get the same value here because we're throwing away the numerator, and remainder or percentage sign names.count makes sure that we always get a positive remainder in there, 0 to 1 minus the number of women we have in the names array. And if we try this out, you can go forward and backward. If we head to Ada Lovelace and we press the left-handed button, we get to Tamarian Rogers again, working perfectly. That last one was a bit challenging, but not too much because it was really just middle school math. But if you used if logic in here instead of the remainder operator, you got healthy partial credit. Next question, pressing the shuffle button should do what's necessary in order to choose a random name image bio of someone in the names list. So you want to choose somebody randomly in the names list and show all the other related information, and the person should not be the same as the current person shown in the app, meaning the same woman should not be profiled twice in a row. So let's build this. So down in the button action, we could get a random index by saying current index equals int.random with the in range passing in 0 triple dot names.count -1. But if you click this enough times, you're going to see that the random woman is repeated sometimes twice in a row. We want to avoid that, so why don't we comment this out? And instead of working on the current index, let's create a new index, which is going to get a new random value, and we'll compare that with the current index. And as long as the new index is different from the current index, we can go ahead and update our index. Otherwise, we want to keep generating a new index until it's different from the current index. So we'll say var new index colon int. We've declared this value, but we haven't initialized it. We'll say repeat, then below the curlies. Up here in between the curlies, we're going to get our new index by using the same expression down here, which gives us a value from 0 to names.count -1, meaning it'll give us an index value for one of the elements in our names array. So I've copied this from the line I commented out, and then in between the curlies, I'm going to say new index equals, and I'll paste that value in int.random in 0 names.count -1. And now that we have our new index, in the while statement, we're just going to check to see if new index double equals current index. If these two things are the same, we want to repeat over and over again until we get a new index which is different from the current index, at which point we'll fall through. Then I can delete the statement down here and simply say current index equals new index. We've got our new current index. Now because current index is a state variable, once we change the current index, everything else in our user interface will change. Let's try this out. And you can click on the shuffle button as long as you want and you're never going to get a repeating value. Cool, and now let's finish this app up. So Steve Jobs used to refer to a well-designed interface as one that can offer surprise and delight. Let's add a bit of surprise and delight to the Women in Computing app. So we're going to update our code so that when we press the shuffle button, not only does it show a random profile, it also plays an MP3 file named theme that you copied over from your download. Fans of the show Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt will know that riff. Let's build. We've worked with audio in 2 of our apps in our video lessons. My students have also worked on that in some of their in-class challenges. We know when we work with audio, we've got to import AVF audio up top. Then we also have to create an audio player variable. I'll do that just before the body variable. We'll say @state private var audio player colon AV audio player exclamation point. That's very important to include in our declaration. This will be an implicitly unwrapped optional. Then we're going to put our function outside of our body variable. So what I'm going to do is use code folding to make sure that I'm at the end just before the closing curly in my struct. I'm going to add my function with func play sound. I'm going to pass in a variable that I'm going to call sound name colon. This is a string value, and in between the curlies, I'll use a guard let statement saying guard let sound file equals ns data asset. Choose the option with the name in here. We're going to pass in the string sound name. That's what we pass into this function. Else, open and close curlies, we're going to return. And just before we return, it's probably good practice for you to point that out. Now, since this will print to the console, it's really only for you as a developer, but hopefully this will never occur when your app is running. But we'll say print error could not read file named, and in string interp sound name, I'll put an angry emoji in front of error, make sure I put it in the right spot. But if the guard statement lets through, then we're going to do open and close curlies, catch open and close curlies. And in the do statement, we create an audio player and put that inside of our audio player variable. We'll say audio player equals AVF audio player. Select the option with data. Of course, through experience and by paying attention to code completion, we see that this throws, so we're going to need a try statement in here. How do we get the data? Well, that's part of our sound file property, so we say sound file.data. It'll extract just the data to play the sound. But we'll get an error in here. Remember, we need to have try out in front of AV audio player because this could potentially throw an error, so we'll put try out front. Now if this works, we'll audio player dot play, open and close parens, that'll play our sound. However, if it doesn't work, we'll put an error in between the catch. I'll just copy the error up here. We'll make some modifications. Print error string interp error.localize description, creating audio player. Now let's unfold that body variable and find our code inside of the button. This is our button action, and just before we process all this code to find the random element, we'll call play sound, passing in our theme. Let's try this out. We go forward and backward just fine. Let's shuffle it up.
Females are strong and unbreakable. Females are strong and unbreakable.
Magnificent, Swifter. I hope this worked out well for you. If you did, I salute your skills. We're now 1/3 of the way through our course. If you struggled, remember we have an opportunity for a retake for a lower score, but this really reflected concepts that we've done in our lessons, and nearly everything on the exam also was repeated in class or required simple code logic to complete. If you did struggle, hang in there, review this lesson and any related lessons or class slides, and keep hacking. I'm sure you'll conquer these skills soon.